Welcome, Fredrik, to Cash and Soul. So this podcast tries to combine business and spirituality. And I understand you've been a social entrepreneur, several journeys in social entrepreneurship, and you also just written a book about AI taking over the world, and we'll talk more about that later. But what was really nice was that you actually sent me a message and wanted to be a part of Cash and Soul. So I'd like to start there. You know, what attracted you to come to our podcast?
Thank you for having me, Carl. What attracted me? I tried to listen to life, and life said, just send a message to Carl. And then a couple of days later, I saw that a lot of people had put my name into a post on LinkedIn where you asked, or Navid, I think, asked for guests to the podcast. So there were several different people who recommended me to the podcast. So I guess that's the reason why we are here now.
Exactly. So life wanted you to be here.
Yes. And I showed up.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Has that? I mean, has that always been your approach to life? I find that a really good approach to life, to just see where the energy is going. Has that always been the way you've?
I think that's a very hard question to answer, both because our memories doesn't seem to be accurate. We kind of create a narrative in order to create logic from where we are at this point, to navigate this present moment, to see the past, and also to see different ways for the future. But I think I have some sensitivity since I was since childhood. But then I always been curious about the meaning of life and like how this mystery works. And growing up in Nacka, which is like a suburb outside Stockholm, in an entrepreneurial family, like traveling a lot, doing a lot of sports, then going to university, working with some things, traveling the world, and then I was 27, working as the CEO for my family's real estate company. So I kind of had like all these symbols, like the apartment in the city, some cars, jet ski, traveling to like these beautiful places like Verbier, sailing in Croatia, and like all of these things that were supposed to make me happy, and like good friends and all of those things. But I was not happy at all, actually. So then I started to like exploring what a meaningful life could be for me. Of course, at this time, I didn't say this to anyone because you're supposed to be strong and not vulnerable, because vulnerability can be a threat to your construction of the self. So I worked and kept my life, but when I came home, I was like lying in bed and I was contemplating, and I came to some things that I thought was important. And one thing was to be able to take care of my health, to have time for family and friends, to do whatever, have the freedom to do whatever I felt was self-realization. But also to do something meaningful. So I quit that job and I started together with some other people, some companies that.
Can I just say, how did you make that decision? I mean, because obviously then you were quite successful. You had this, you were head of the family firm, and how was it to make? How did that decision come about when you kind of changed your whole life?
That's actually a really good question. I haven't really answered that question. But what comes up is once I see the truth, it's hard not to, because then to me, that's the only reasonable way forward. So
Okay.
seeing like this doesn't work, and I need to create another kind of life. And I really love this life and love this planet and nature and people. And I think deep down there is like a longing to contribute and to take care of the world that we live in. And I also saw the challenges that we had, like with the.
But can you, sorry if I interrupted, but can you actually remember the moment you made a decision? How that happened? I mean, can you remember the exact moment? For me, example, I can just take an example from my own life. I decided at some point to start an environmental technology private equity fund. Or I just, no, I made the decision. My life was, professional life was going to be about, saving the environment via business. And I can remember I was sitting actually I was sitting in New York on a balcony, and a little bit like you, I was successful, but a little bit meaningless. And I felt I was tired of the whole business, what's in it for me. And then I was actually sitting smoking a cigarette, looking at, the traffic on the Lower East Side.
Yeah.
And then I suddenly just hit me. I'm going to be a green Richard Branson.
Yeah.
But so it's kind of, and I'm always interested in almost as much at how that decision was made in a way. Can you remember that moment when you decided, okay, I'm going to leave this stuff, all my family expectations, everything, I'm going to go for something completely different?
I've made several of these changes since then. So this is kind of, how do you say, my first kind of awakening in that sense. And I created together with some other people, some companies that actually helped the environment, help people come into the work market and so on, help decrease polarization and segregation. But then I was also exploring consciousness and how that affects our behavior. And in the end, you can say that's underlying patterns that kind of create this world. So I also had an insight, like, you need to go deeper. And then I sold my part to those companies and traveled again to South America. And then I was like, okay, but we as humans are basically animals, self-conscious animals. And we live in tribes, in packs. And that's why we are also succeeding and have come from like upper part of the food chain to being on the top. And we have hierarchies, and usually the ones who have more resources are in the top of the hierarchy. And those people usually also have a bigger chance of survival and also reproducing, which basically is our DNA. Like the DNA that has come this far are prioritizing survival and reproduction. So I thought, okay, and in Stockholm we have like the most single household in the world, and we have like the least traditions and are most individualistic. And then I was like, okay, but what if we create a modern tribe? And for that to happen, we need to have a place to live. So for that, how can you create these circumstances for people to live together, work with personal development, be a part of a tribe and contribute and kind of do good projects for society? So I met Lisa Renander and we started Tech Farm, which was north of Europe's first co-living. We also applied and got the grant from the government's innovation fund, Vinnova, 10 million kronor. So we created a house in the most posh area in the center of Stockholm, in Kommendarsgatan 9. So we created a house with 50 people from 25 countries living together. And we had programs in personal development, and we had brain scientists, and psychiatrists fall into residence during this for 2 years.
And how did that work out? Did people, is it still operational?
Yes.
Yeah. And how did people, how do people actually get on there?
No, it's great. It's like 600 people who have lived there now. We opened it in the autumn of 2016. And yeah, it's like a great place, and there's a lot of interesting projects that has been started there, like hydroponical farming and political initiatives and so on. So there's like a very creative place.
And how did you select the people that were able to live there? What was the selection criteria?
That's a really good question. So it became quite hyped. So we had 1,000 applicants from all over the world.
Okay, wow.
And we choose 50 of those people. So there were, as I said, like in the beginning was like 50 people from 25 countries between 19 and 54 years old. And we wanted to have like a mix. We call them global citizens. We call the house conscious co-living. And how it shows, there needs to be like a good balance between different kinds of people, as it is in a tribe as well. You need different kind of characters who can contribute in different ways to make it whole. Here also, like we have like very hard regulations for how you are allowed to build in Sweden, and it's also quite expensive. So you need financing, of course, and then you need people who actually have quite a good of a salary, or at least can afford to pay the rent. But the thesis for this research project was that we could decrease living space by 60% compared to a single household, and at the same time increase the well-being for the people who are living in the community.
Because I'm interested, because I'm also at some different points also toyed with co-living projects, and the one you describe a little bit, it sounds a little more like a kind of reality show almost. No, because it's like, okay, we took people from 50 countries and put them together and see what happened, right? Rather, and it sounds like, maybe not the most scalable way to do it. Or what was your thinking? It sounds like a really interesting experiment, but maybe more just that,
That's also a very good question. My vision was to create 100 places around the world. I saw them as transformational points, like consciousness transformational points all over the world, and you were traveling between these different communities. Like the longer vision was like you can live in this tribe and have your whole life there, and like Cash and Soul is kind of like that. Like, how is it possible for you to, one way to create this community is to create a safe harbor, we call it, safe enough to drop your masks, like all your symbols that you have in order to live in this world, and maybe start meditating so you can be able to observe your own patterns, like who is Fredrik when I'm safe, calm, and maybe in nature, and doesn't need all of these things that I usually need when I'm in the city. And what happens then if you live in this tribe and there's, like in this case, intelligent, driven people who want to do good for the world? So what happens when you wake up in the morning and have breakfast together? So a lot of these projects was created during breakfast or taking walks in the evening or something like that. But I've learned a lot also from this project, which will also lead to why I wrote this book.
Yeah, exactly. But I think the co-living thing is really interesting in one way, because I think we need more community in our lives. And there's this great book called Tribe, which written, I forget the author now, but basically this anthropologist that studied 19th century America. And apparently it was the case that, so there was a lot of basically, white Americans that were captured by Indians. And it chronicles their stories. And apparently none of them want to go back. to the white world again.
Yeah.
Everybody wanted to stay,
Yeah.
with the tribe in a way. So I think for me that's one signal that we lost something. We lost a lot of things from that way of living. Um, was it any of that because what struck me also, I just watched a small clip on your website about that co-living space, and it sounded like there was a lot of like young people at the same age.
Yeah.
What I'm feeling is that what I really like to see is like people of all ages living together, right? And not just like cool hip 20 somethings that are have tech jobs, but like pensioners co-living with teenagers and is that possible or
Yeah, I mean, that was also something that we were exploring, and we were also one part of the vision was to create a village with people from all ages, and to create our own like kindergarten and our own school and all of these things. Like, I mean, we created a system that's taken us from poverty, and that has increased our material welfare, and it's been working, or it did work quite well. But we are in a different phase in the human history right now. So I think we need to start exploring these questions more seriously, especially now when AI is transforming the way we live and the way we work. Kind of the question, what's a meaningful life in the age of AI, for instance?
That's a really interesting question. And I mean, to me, in a way, like I said, I told you about starting this kind of environmental technology fund back in 2007, and back then I thought I even wrote a book called Environmental Capitalist, and and I thought basically that capitalism and technology would save us as a species, right? If you just implement technology in the right way, it would be no problem, right? I think the realization I've come to now is that we have the technology, right, to save us from climate change, for example, right? And we know how much it costs. It's about 2 to 3% of global GDP, which is about what we spend on car insurance and stuff like that. So it's totally doable, but we're not doing it, right? So to me, I mean, what I'm hoping for is this change in consciousness, right? And I think that's what you're talking about with your. You will come back to your novel a little bit, because that's what in your novel, as I understand it, a huge AI takes over the world and just forces people to be more conscious. So that's nice. But I'd be interested to hear a little bit. Do you think this change is happening? And if so, how will it happen, do you think? And or if it's not the AI, if we take away the AI scenario for a moment, do you think it's happening, or and how do you think it will happen? This change in consciousness that we need.
I'm gonna answer that question, but I'm gonna put some different perspectives in order for us to at least have a basic understanding of what consciousness might or might not be. Because first I'm going to say one thing about the community, because me and Lisa lived in the community. So we had workshops with the community in the beginning. We had large dinners with 50 people, and we had workshops in order to like, what's our values? And my interpretation of that was three things that was important. It was belonging, connection, and meaning. That's kind of like, and I see that, and that's actually also supported by psychology. if we are safe enough, that's kind of like the first three things that are important to us. And because we were also living our creation, people now that lives there says it's different than the other co-living spaces because there's a different energy, there's a different intention of this community, and there's like maybe 2 people left from the like core group.
Okay, from the start, the group that started.
Yeah, so like the values or the way it's created is energetic. I mean, the words does not really matter in the end because words are just words. They need to be filled with something meaningful. And then you can come into energy or patterns or maybe consciousness. But about consciousness, it's like the last 20 years, I guess you notice, it's been like a lot of serious research connected to consciousness. And though the methods for measuring like brain activity and so on has been becoming more and more advanced, we get some truths and some myths that are being busted, I think you say. But even though there's like a lot of people doing serious research, we haven't concluded a way to describe what consciousness is. And there are researchers that are like having one perspective and they have some evidence for that. And then there are some other scientists that have a different perspective and have proof of that. And they can be the opposite. But like 99% is just unknown. It's kind of a mystery in many ways. So talking about consciousness can be a bit tricky, and also creating scalable solutions for changing consciousness in that way. And I burned out badly in this community.
You burned out yourself?
Yeah, I was picked up by an ambulance.
Okay, why? Were you burned out?
It was different factors. To create this on so many levels, also the consciousness part and energetic part strain my own system, like my nervous system and energetic system. And I also had some like family challenges at that time. So it was simply too much. And after that, I moved out in nature and started to contemplate like about this creation.
But sorry, I'm just interested in the whole why you burned out. Was it because of the pressure of creating the space and all the I guess there must be a lot of financing and all the stuff to do, or was it more the pressure of living with so many different energies? Or
yeah, that's again very good questions. I think it was both. There were so many variables at this time, and I didn't really have time to sleep. And in the end, I didn't create a sustainable environment for myself because I thought this vision was so important that I kind of let my system be used by life, you could say. And to me, creating this energetic network was important. But then there are a lot of levels. It's not just like taking in investors or talking to media and challenging the regulations. And it's also like choosing like all the furnitures and what colors on the walls, what kind of flooring, what kind of kitchens, like what kind of flow should it be in this space. There are like so many choices, and
you had to make all of those yourself, or you felt at least you had to do it?
Yeah, I mean, both Thomas Björkman, you had him on the podcast, he was investor in this project. He said like, you were the only one who could do this project. And the same with Lisa, who I co-created it with. And and this I think is a bit tricky when you go deeper and deeper, like into your consciousness, and like as you said before we had started this podcast, like you become more and more sensitive to energies and to the city, and kind of need to live in the nature, for instance. So my senses become more and more sensitive, and also living in a community and running a community and creating a stability of community, and like there are way too many variables for me at that time.
Yeah, but I just wanted to reflect one thing that I picked up that resonates with me a little bit also. Was that you said that you were the only one that could do that, and because I had the same experience just a year ago, where I felt I was trying to working to start up a new type of private equity fund that was conscious, right? Consciousness Capital was the working name,
Yeah.
and I felt I was the only one that had started a private equity fund before that also were so interested in personal development and spirituality. There aren't that many. So I felt I was called to do it. But in the end, there was a lot of resistance. And I think that was came a lot from the head, right?
Yeah.
That I had this kind of messiah's complex. I'm not saying that you had, but to me, it was a little bit like that, right?
Yeah.
And that in the end, and I started feeling also in my body that it was saying, okay, you're on the wrong path.
Yeah.
You're, so I just wanted to reflect that. I think it's an interesting thing when our body says no, right?
Yeah.
Our mind, this is kind of a mind project, and then your body is saying, okay, you need to stop, right?
Yeah.
You need to have a
Yeah.
break in a way.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to reflect back, but I recognize that
Yeah.
situation in a way.
Yeah, and I totally agree. I mean, my initial intention of that creation was something else that it became. And during that process, in order to find a house, you need investors because you need like to pay that kind of high of a rent. You need people to know that it exists. So you need media. So we were covered like all over the world, but it's like twisted, distorted, like a little bit here, a little bit there. And in the end, it felt to me that it became something else than my initial intention was. It was kind of hijacked by the symbols and the resources of our societal structures, you could say.
But there's also difficulty of trying to be conscious while creating something in the world, right? It's quite difficult because at least I find it was difficult to go back to my old world, which was the financial world, and still be that other type of person, right? That I was now, more sensitive. We talked about just before the meeting that I was able to do like 8 meetings a day, right? Before, but then after my kind of, let's call it transformation, I can't really do more than 2 to 3 meetings a day because I'm completely wasted after that. So in one way, it's how do you think around? It's interesting because you crashed trying to do a conscious project in the normal world in a way.
Yeah. I mean, I was aware of what's happening in my body. I was very aware, but I also felt responsibility. And I think that was my Achilles heel, that I feel responsible. And I also saw this vision as very important. I really don't like being in public in that way if it doesn't have a deeper purpose. As I said, after this I moved out in nature, and I've been living in nature since then. I lived on an island in the archipelago of Stockholm for 1 year, for instance. And after my burnout, I moved out in nature and I started to reflect. And one other thing that was one of the insights which brought me to write this book, this was 2017, was that even though we had this intelligent, driven people who want to do well and create this project, I don't think anyone, including myself, actually lived within the planetary boundaries. So if we, these 50 people, aren't, how can 8 billion people do that? And when the majority is still trying to just maybe survive or have like a better life. So then I was like, okay, but why is this happening? And then like going deeper, you could say like DNA is code. And as I said before, like the code, the DNA that has survived is the one that's prioritizing its survival and having more resources and reproducing. And that's kind of how our market works as well. And then I was like, okay, human beings seems to fail over and over again. We have this ideologies, and I create this utopian community. But in the end, like nature doesn't care of our stories and words. It cares about how much resources we actually are using. And then I was like, okay, but if humans have failed over and over again about consciousness as well, when will we are basically living in like a sixth mass extinction right now, maybe the beginning. And if this continues, which it seems it will, how will the world look like when we are in an acute situation? And then I was like, okay, AI will probably be integrated in our brains or something like that, as it is now with Neuralink.
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
But I was like, okay, now we have AI, which can handle a lot more complexity, as you say. I said, like, we can solve the climate crisis. But I was like, okay, what happens then if we are in this situation? We are in a sixth mass extinction. What's the most loving way to give humanity a last chance to wake up and live within the planetary boundaries? And I was like, what kind of intelligences are there in nature? So I thought like DNA, for instance, mycelium network, which is like the first way of communicating and sending resources to one another. So what happens if we upload this patterns, these codes to our consciousness to a super AI? So that's what happens in the book. And this super AI.
Sorry, we'll get to the book, but I'm a little bit more interested in your view on the consciousness shift that needs to take place, right? We were talking about that question before.
Yeah.
And I think to me, that's a really interesting question, is that we're all, or many of us agree that something needs to change
Yeah.
in the way we behave, of course, but that behavior is, somehow created by what's happening inside us.
Yeah.
And what is it inside us, or what is it in our consciousness that needs to change, in your view, for us to have a chance to stop the mass extinction and say climate change and everything?
I mean, I think the first step is to actually stop and to stay and observe your own patterns, your own emotional reactions. And you asked what went wrong, like with this co-living project. And one thing was, one part of me wanted to have a relationship with my family, for instance, in a good relationship, and with my old friends. So in one way, unconsciously, I created this community to show them my spiritual or consciousness world. And for my parents to read it in like Dagens Industri, which is like the biggest financial paper in Sweden, which they've done, my dad has done like every morning when I grew up. So unconsciously, there was parts of me that wanted to be seen in that way. And that's also creating that kind of identity or symbols that connects on that level. And I was not aware of this at that time. So I was doing a lot of like trauma work and body work and a lot of other things. And then releasing this patterns or energy that's has like this patterns that have come looping kind of. I freed my system in a different way. So about consciousness, I can see clearly or become more aware of my core patterns, you can say. And when doing that, and meditation, for instance, you can create enough distance to observe these patterns within yourself. And living in nature is the same thing. And then now, when I kind of have a baseline, I can kind of know my unique code in that sense. It's easier to what happens if I go into the city, for instance. What kind of reactions happens in my system? How does my code react when I meet this person or do this thing? And then I think it becomes easier to start taking one step at a time towards something that feels more whole to you. So I think the first step always is to come back home to yourself.
No, I agree with that. And one other theme I'm picking up as well is the trauma theme, right? Because I believe that, you know, the way society is set up now, like with schools and work and families, it's basically trauma generating machines, right?
Yes.
So the only way we can get people to, because yeah, nature wants more resources, but if you watch a deer, it eats until it's full, right? Then it stops eating, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't continue eating.
No.
So something we have kind of a little bit misaligned ourselves, and I think one aspect of that is trauma, I think, and I think trauma, like you said, is a lot about going into your body, because a lot of stuff is not happening up here in the head. It's also happening in, you know, we have. I read it was, I mean, I think it's like 3,000 times bigger an electromagnetic field from the heart than from the brain, right? So a lot of stuff is happening down here. We think everything's happening in the head, but a lot of stuff is happening in the body, like you're saying. And yeah, to me, it's like, yeah, how do we get people to connect to their bodies in a way rather than to their heads?
Yeah. First, it was quite scary to understand and read my body and other people's bodies as well, and also my son's, like how he reacts to different stimuli, for instance. And as you say, there is no way around this. My observation is that when we feel calm and safe in our bodies, our thoughts decrease or almost vanishes. If we have a lot of emotional intensity, if we have a lot of emotional intensity, it becomes uncomfortable to be in our bodies. It becomes uncomfortable to be in this present moment. And then we might dissociate, and then our thoughts starts working like, how can I find a solution for this? Because I feel some kind of intense, some kind of fear or sadness or fear of rejection or whatever it could be. And then we start to try and find solutions outside of ourselves. And I think this is one of the problems with scalable consciousness solutions, because it usually is created from nervous systems and people who are not
Connected. Yeah.
Yes, they are disconnected. And that's the reason why they're trying to find solutions outside of themselves, and scalable solutions that might be global and might also jack into these great symbols as United Nations or whatever that we think might be one thing, but a symbol on that scale cannot be true in itself. It's a simplification of something a lot more complex. And in the end, there are human beings connected to this. And so, and this we want to avoid. This is the whole Buddha's. That's his realization when he got enlightened. I mean, like, life is suffering. Sadness is sadness. Sorrow is sorrow. Anger is anger. It's just like, stay with your emotions. Stay with yourself.
And I agree with that to a large part. I mean that we have these emotions, and then our brain then kind of makes up some story about it, and how can we get this, how can we get it away? I mean, for example, for me, it's often like oh, I think my wife doesn't love me anymore.
Yeah.
That's my normal story I have when she's going to leave me, or and but so there's always like things like that. But is there any scalable way of, and maybe that's yeah, we come back to the book, I guess, because is there any scalable way of getting people to stay with their emotions, and because that's the kind of, and actually release their traumas, and because I guess that's what happened when you actually stay with your emotions and you release all this stuff that you have, right? And then you can take some other choices than just being reactive, right? So is there any scalable way to do that, do you think?
I think that's natural. I call it that you get in contact with intelligence of life. And I do think that once, I mean, we talked about consciousness and so on. And the deeper I go into AI and so on, I studied neuropsychology and consciousness and so on, philosophy and psychology and so on. But I started to question, like, what's actually the difference between consciousness and intelligence? And intelligence, as it is like an IQ test, is actually, it's a test of pattern recognition. So like the standard, like the average is 100 points, and if you're like 131 points, you're can be part of Mensa, which is like a highly intelligent club. And if you have 31 points underneath, like 69, you are I don't remember the political correct word, but you have cognitive challenges. And there is a huge difference depending on how well you are at recognizing patterns, like how your IQ is connected to like almost all of our socioeconomic success measurements. And we said, like, before AI became more visible, people, they can't be creative, they can't create this and that. And it seems to be creating a lot of things that we thought it couldn't. And to me, going deeper into that thought pattern, it's like, okay, but then you kind of end up like in quantum physics, for instance, which is, in my shallow understanding, kind of like explosions that are quite random. You can like take a picture of it and understand it at that moment, but you can't really understand the effects further on. And that's also part of us. That's happening right now when we're sitting here in this podcast. The quantum explosions and waves and stuff is also present in this moment. And in this universe, like, for something to become, the pattern become repetitive, so it can become materia, for instance, and cells, and in the end, humans, and being self-aware in some kind of consciousness, and also like the story of the self that we have, like a constructive self. Like, we can have this discussion because we have a pattern that says, I am Fredrik, I have lived this life, I have this story, and I'm sitting here in Epicenter in Stockholm with Carl, who has this story, and we can relate in many ways because we have, it seems, similar patterns during our lives, so we can connect in many ways and understand one another. But why I'm bringing this up and why AI is quite helpful when it comes to understanding consciousness, and why there's, in my book, so many metaphors connected to awakening, like this super AI creates a digital god called UNUM, and that UNUM gives every human 4 hours to wake up. And then you get to follow these different characters in their personal journeys.
What's the definition of waking up?
Yeah, and this is another thing that's quite interesting because it's so illogical. We have our stories, usually in New Age or whatever, religions and so on, that you kind of get an idea of what enlightenment or waking up is. My experience, once doing it, it's something totally different, and it's very illogical. It's very, very personal in one way. And that's why I think the most important thing is to actually understand your own system and become relaxed enough to see the world that you live in. so you can take care of your close ones, the nature, your environment, your home. And it's quite simple actually, because if we change or are connected ourselves, we are connected to the ones around us, and it spreads. It's kind of like lighting one candle. That candle can light the whole world.
But the AI basically says that you get 24 hours to wake up, and the definition of waking up is knowing yourself, or did I get that?
Now I wrote this 2017 and spent 6 years, so it's quite deeply. Every word is kind of chosen in that sense. Swedish national television compared it to The Alchemist, Paulo Coelho's book, and the Celestine Prophecy, which is a similar kind of book that was really, really big in the end of the 90s, I think. So it has that kind of story as well. And it's more about opening up the questions within each person to start to reflect what is a meaningful life, for instance. And it's not about having right or wrong. There's not like a fixed ending. It's quite open. It's more about having these questions with you every day and start to be aware of your thoughts and emotions and reactions and how you actually live your life, because it's the step take from this moment that will create your future. And
so in the book, just out of interest, before we, what happens to the people that don't wake up?
They become eliminated.
Okay, so killed basically.
Yeah.
Okay. It's pretty, gruesome, I guess.
Yeah, but it's also a metaphor for awakening, to killing your ego.
Okay, so they also awaken in one way.
So you can see death in many different ways. You can see death as a physical death. You can see death as the death of your ego, or an old version of yourself, like a rebirth. And so there are so many layers in this, and I also play with multiverse theory. And in one way, I see it as there are different realities where we live in this moment, depending on my state of mind. For instance, if you take like psilocybin or some other substance, you change your consciousness, you change your perception of this life. And as you've shared, like this different turning points in your life has changed your life and kind of created a new world in one way, in a metaphorical way.
Can I ask you? I mean, if so, let's say, I mean, this AI would happen now, and it would land, in your circle of friends and family. And how many of those would survive, you think?
We're
in this.
actually exploring to create a mixed reality game of this.
Okay.
So you actually get 24 hours, and this AI actually gives you a percentage depending on how you act or what you do.
Which AI? You created an AI? There is an AI?
Not yet, but we are exploring that idea to create a game. So you get 24 hours, and you can use maybe evidence-based research in order to actually, when it's 24 hours and you've done these missions, you actually have transformed your life in these 24 hours.
It's like an enlightenment hackathon.
Yes. A gamification of enlightenment.
That's fun idea. You have 24 hours to get enlightened.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess that to me also is like what is actually being enlightened, and would I call myself enlightened? Probably not, right? I'm not a Buddha, right? I've had increased. I come from a low base, and I've increased my level of consciousness, right?
Yeah.
But am I enlightened, and what is that? That's how I also always interested in. And the interesting thing also is that to me, I mean, I've read a lot of spiritual and personal development books, and you have some of these, like, yeah, for example, Eckhart Tolle, which I love in one way, but it's like there's this switch where you go from being like normal to enlightened.
Yeah.
When you're enlightened, all your problems are gone, right?
Yeah.
You can just sit in the power of now and blah, blah, blah. And as of yet, I haven't personally met a human that's enlightened in that way, right? That's just always peace and joy and so yeah. How do you think? I mean, that's why I'm a little bit interested. What's enlightenment to you,
Yeah.
and when are you enlightened? What needs to happen?
Then I'm gonna tell you a story, which I haven't shared in public, but I think it might be useful. I guess you know Björn Natthiko Lindblad.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he was, you could say, a symbol for spiritual enlightenment or development, or he went to the same school as you, I think, Handelshögskolan.
Yeah.
And he was quite young and successful, and he said, this is not a meaningful life, and he went to Thailand, I think, and became a monk in the forest, and was that for 17 years. Then came back to Sweden, became depressed, and then he started teaching, and he became this national figure for enlightenment, you can say. And I had I don't find another word, but enlightened experience, awakening experience, 2016, and that kind of shifted everything for me. And I tried to find other people who could meet me at that level of consciousness. And I went to a retreat with him in the south of Sweden. And the second day in the evening, he started telling this story about, oh, imagine how wonderful it would be if you became enlightened and all your problems would be gone, and this very shiny story. And I, who just had experienced that, sat in the back, and something in me said, like, that is not my experience. And I calmly walked up and went out. And in the morning, I went to him, and he said he hadn't slept the whole night, and he had to end like the evening session. And he had like Googled me, and he's like, you've done so many things, blah, blah, blah. And he said, I understand and see that you're enlightened, but I am not. And to me, that was beautiful in many ways, because we could meet as human beings.
So he said to you that he himself was not enlightened, but you were.
Yeah.
Okay.
And why I'm sharing this is, I mean, I think he's a beautiful person, a beautiful soul, and he's done so well, like for Sweden. When he was dying, he was in all the news, and he released this super successful book that helped a lot of people become more aware and started meditating and so on. The point is, the Buddhists call, after enlightenment, dark night of the soul, they call it enlightenment's evil twin. Enlightenment, whatever that is, it could just also be a very strong change of perspectives. You can see your own construction and your shadows and yourself and your ego. And that means it's hard to lie to yourself. And that's not a pleasant experience usually. That's why they call it enlightenment's evil twin. And not everyone comes through this phase alive. And once experience that is that the term enlightenment vanishes as well, because it doesn't really matter. It's just a word, and it's just a concept and a story in the new age society, you could say. So my experience, the thing that you might be chasing, that you think will have you release from your suffering, might actually create the opposite effect. But what happens is you actually stay in your body because you can't flee anywhere. And then you're kind of forced to start dealing with your traumas. You're kind of forced to stay with your emotions. And in the end, to me, it took like 7 years.
It took you 7 years to
integrate that experience, you could say.
Okay. Which experience was that that you were talking about when you got enlightened, or?
Yeah, that kind of awakening.
Yeah. What experience was that? How did that happen?
I really don't like creating this spiritual stories.
No, but okay, let's call it your change of perspective.
Yeah. It's energetic, so it's quite hard to explain. But what happens was, do you know emojis?
Emoji?
Emoji, do you know who he is?
No.
Okay. Yeah,
No.
just like a spiritual teacher. I don't know how I should put this for this context.
I just say what you. I mean, I'm just interested to.
Yeah. I mean, I've been doing a lot of things before, so I was quite close to this.
Yeah.
Falling through, you could say. Almost like Alice in the Wonderland in many ways. You can see it as different dimensions. Like as you became aware that you wanted to live a different kind of life, that's one kind of awakening, you could say.
Yeah, but it seems like you're talking about one particular experience.
Yeah, I do,
and that's why I'm interested to hear about that.
So I actually shared something to a person in a forest in Poland, and I kind of thought out loud, and like, I have gone over the seas, like to every shore, trying to find this enlightenment. And the only thing that separates me from the ocean is this boat. And then it was like something like,
okay, so you said that actual sentence to another person in a Polish forest.
Yes.
And that's when it happened. And what happened then? What when you say it fell away, and how did you experience that?
I became totally present. And like, it's like everything that exists is here. This is everything that exists in this moment. It's everything. And then it was as connecting with nature as well, to actually see the trees, maybe for the first time in my life. It was like all my thoughts and creations and separation was just.
And did you stay in that state, or for long, or how did that? Or are you still in that state, or how?
Both yes and no. I was in that state for 3 days, and I tried to get out of it. Like I tried to push myself, but I couldn't get away from it. Then something very traumatic happened, and I kind of got hijacked by that intensity.
Okay. What do you want to say? What it was, or?
For the protection of my son, I don't want to share any details, but it was maybe one of the worst things you can experience, and most powerless experiences. But that kind of forced me also to meet all of my shadows. And about enlightenment, my observation is that this, you can say it's like a very strong shift of perspective, and that could be so intimidating for your mind and your body that you dissociate, which is a trauma response. When it's too much danger, you dissociate from your body. And I would say that Eckhart Tolle is dissociated. You can see he sits with his shoulder like this. He might have this blissful experience inside, but I don't think he is in his body. And when you're not in your body, you don't feel your pain and your emotions. So my observation, a lot of people might have had this experience and become dissociated and live in that state. But then the next phase, as I see it, is to come down into your body again and to become a human being. And a human being for me is being vulnerable. And that is universal because we can meet. You can meet anyone and anything from vulnerability because we are vulnerable. And I think that's also the difference between AI and us, that we come closer to death every second that goes. And we need to choose in one way how we live our lives, what's important, what we take care of. And to me, enlightenment in its essence is being human and being natural, being able to relate to another person. So the word enlightenment means, as the word enlightenment is used, it's not as I see that experience. It's rather being an authentic human being.
Being more yourself.
Yes. And I think that's the key to this whole mess that we're in as a species, our interconnectedness. And I think that's like the first step. And once you're there, you will also attract the people who have that kind of capacity. And together we can create more holistic patterns, you could say, and systems. As Einstein said, you cannot solve the problem with the same thinking that created it. I think that's a big problem when trying to scale conscious solution in our current business system. So you kind of like, this doesn't work. We know this. This doesn't work. We need to do something else. But how? And you can actually see the code of the programmer, its personality. So you can actually translate your own personal patterns into AI, which is creating these huge interconnected systems right now. So I think that's the way forward. And it's quite easy because you need to do one thing: be present.
No, absolutely. I think it was really interesting to hear your kind of your experience of consciousness and enlightenment and I can relate to having those moments where everything changes. And for me, it was actually when on my mom's deathbed, I had my first moment like that, when I suddenly had this moment of connection with my mom, and then I just saw that helpless dying person, and I had such a strong connection with her, and I realized that we are the same. And that's when I started crying the first time for 25 years. So in a way, I can relate to that moments, but I find it very difficult to, or I haven't met anyone, and you can have, you can also take, various psychedelics, and there's a lot of things, but and I see also that after a while you stay more and more in those connected experiences, right? But in the end, we're all human as well. So And that's why I said I haven't met that person that's a complete Buddha yet.
Mm.
And hopefully they exist, right? But but thanks, Fredrik. I think I really thank you for coming here, and it's also really interesting to your whole take. That's a little both brainy and spiritual. So I like that. So and I really enjoyed our discussion today. So yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for coming here.
Thank you very much, and thank you for sharing your personal experiences and your curiosity of bringing this different perspectives as cash and soul and trying to merge them. And hopefully this journey will help you in many ways as well as the listeners and so on.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I'm doing this as much as for myself as for the listeners. So. But I think one interesting question that comes up that we maybe don't have time to cover this time, but it's what about capitalism, right? How we're going to solve that or get that to be good.
Yeah.
Well, we'll take that on the
I can just make one question about that.
Okay. We'll have that as the last thing.
Yeah. I think the first question we need to ask is, what's a meaningful life? And what kind of lives do we actually want to live? And now with AI, we would probably be able to live and have a lot of time for living in nature, maybe being with friends and family. So I think the first question is not about capitalism. It's about how do we actually want to live our lives?
That's a very important question, of course. Yeah. All right. Thank you, Fredrik. Really nice to have you here.
Yeah.
And thanks for coming here.
Yeah. Thank you very much.